Sweet. All right, so happy to be here to talk to you guys today. I'd like to speak on design tools. It's kind of a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. How many of you guys are designers? Like your day job is designing apps or websites? All right, so that's basically most people here. So this should go well. So I want to talk about first why design tools are important, how they influence our work, and then also take a quick look at how we can make better tools and give a quick demo of what that means. Then there'll be a short Q&A at the end. So first, a really quick intro about me. I'm currently a product designer at Dropbox, where I work on our carousel app and photos in general. Prior to that, I was leading a design team at Groupon in Chicago for about 3 years. And previously at a small startup called Less, which works on small business accounting software. So I really love tools. If any of you guys follow me on Twitter or anything, you probably know that it's like half of what I tweet about or talk about. I've made several that you might find useful. I have a collection of Sketch plugins that's up on GitHub. This one's a really easy way to use guides with Sketch. It makes it a lot easier to use that. I also wrote a QC device patch if you guys use Quartz Composer at all. It allows you to connect your phone to Quartz Composer and take advantage of the accelerometer and gyroscopes on your phone in real time. So it lets you create interesting interactions like this one, where if you have your device connected, this is me actually holding it in my hand, and then you can just kind of flick to go to the next photo and flick to go back. So maybe not the most practical interaction, but this is an example of what you can do with that patch. I also wrote Framer View, which is the best way to get Framer.js prototypes onto your phone. How many of you guys use either Quartz Composer or Framer? Show of hands. Okay, so not that many. Well, hopefully this talk will encourage you guys to dive into it a little more. So why are design tools important? Probably everybody would agree that our tools matter to some extent. We all obviously use tools. Nobody here designs without using Photoshop or Sketch or any of those programs. One big aspect of design is that it's about bringing form to ideas. So as designers, we're pretty good about kind of thinking in our heads about innovative ways to solve problems, but there can often be a struggle of communicating that to other people. So I have this thing at least at the Dropbox design team where when we're talking together, it feels really fluid. We're all just kind of jamming on ideas, and it's really easy to communicate with other designers. But when we have this idea in our mind, it's often difficult to get that out there into the real world and to talk to engineers or product managers about that. So one big part about design is just bringing a form to that, to get it out in the open to where we can talk about it. We can see if it's good or not, if it solves the problem that we're working on. And tools help us do that. So it's really important that our tools enable us to bring form to these ideas. Design is obviously more than just pixels, right? So our tools should be as well. If you're an illustrator, then Photoshop or Illustrator is probably a really good tool. You're creating kind of a static mock-up. That's probably a really good tool for that job. But if you're working on any sort of app or anything that's interactive, Photoshop probably might not be the right tool. Or at least it'll only take you so far. So our designs live in these fully interactive environments, right? Everybody has an iPhone. These apps have things, a notion of like touches and gestures and orientation and state. People are using them when they're walking about, right? There's kind of real world environments and constraints that our designs live in. Our tools should also, again, like reflect this, right? So I'm going to show a quick example of how I might try to kind of communicate something, in Photoshop. So this is an example of a lightbox in Carousel. And I had this idea that if you didn't like a photo, you might want to be able to just swipe down to kind of hide it. So when we explain transitions and animations and behaviors using words, we're basically leaving everything open to interpretation. So I can say that I want to be able to swipe down this photo, but that means something very different to everybody in this room, and especially to the engineers who end up implementing this. So while I have this idea, I have to communicate in a way that I'm showing exactly what I mean and what I'm trying to express with how to swipe it down. So in Photoshop, you might do this thing where you're kind of showing the person the design, and you're like, well, I can kind of like drag it down, I guess, a little bit and do this like animated GIF kind of thing. And that's kind of okay, but it doesn't really express what I want it to. It doesn't have a notion of some of the more finer finesse things of the animation there, of the interaction. There's lots of different states. I might want this to kind of rotate based on where I grab the photo. Like in the real world, if you grabbed a piece of paper, it rotates based on where you kind of started your drag. Photoshop doesn't let you do that. Our tools should enable us to design in the same environment, right, that they live in. So Photoshop it's very static. You can't really do animation. You definitely can't do interaction in it. So two of the probably leading tools in this field right now are Origami and Quartz Composer, which Facebook has released a lot of tools on top of Quartz Composer, and Framer.js. So Framer is what we use a lot at Dropbox. We also use Quartz Composer, but Framer is kind of primarily what we've been using. And these are probably two of the best interaction tools out there right now. There's a company called Puckett, and I think those guys are here this weekend. They're doing some really interesting things in the space. Envision also, is getting into prototyping as well. But these are the two that I at least have used the most, and I found the most success in being able to fully express my ideas. So now I kind of want to show what that same interaction of dragging down on a photo would look like in a Framer prototype that I made. So this allows me to fully express what I mean, where depending on where you start your drag, the photo reacts differently to that. So it's a short movie recording of when I drag down, it kind of rotates, and this X appears over it to let the user know they can release. If I drag on the other side, it obviously rotates the other way, and then when I let go, it kind of springs back to the center. So those are all very subtle animations and transitions that would not be possible in Photoshop. There's just no way to kind of explain that in such a way that somebody else can perceive exactly what I'm thinking. So by using a better design tool, at least for interaction design, such as Framer, I'm able to fully express exactly what I say when the user should be able to drag down this photo. Sometimes you have to build these tools yourselves. Here's an example of a tool that the Mailbox team, for Mailbox for Mac, this is a tool that lets them kind of tweak the values of swiping. So there's any number of ways you can implement swiping. But this tool lets them kind of really get into the details of every aspect of the swipe, how far the user has to drag, what that animation curve is, and it allows them to do that in real time. So tools can either help encourage exploration or they can limit our output. So if a tool allows for rapid iteration, you're more likely to try a lot of ideas. This is why sketching is just so great. You can rapidly sketch out a bunch of ideas. Conversely, if a tool makes it very difficult to produce a design or an interaction, you're probably only going to do like one of those, right? If I'm sculpting a marble statue, that would take me so long to do. It's very hard to work with. It's not quick. I'm not going to be able to learn and fail fast. So we should be using tools that encourage exploration and ideation and allow us to rapidly try out ideas and not fall in love with one because it took us so long to make it. So that's kind of me trying to briefly show the value of using some tools not Photoshop, but using interactive tools that let us express these ideas. And I want to talk a little bit about how we can build toward better design tools. So Quartz Composer and Framer and some of these other tools are pretty good, but I wouldn't say that they're great, and I definitely don't think that they are the best tools that we are capable of. They still leave a lot to be desired. So I want to kind of present some ideas, almost a framework for thinking about how to build better tools, and then show a quick example of a small part of what that might look like. So there's this really great Brett Victor quote that I think about a lot. And if any of you guys have seen his talks, he very much is kind of encouraging discussion about this idea. And it's that creators need an immediate connection to what they create. So if you think about other artistic mediums, such as music or painting, creators have an immediate connection there. If I'm playing guitar, as soon as I hit the strings, I hear the sound that it makes. I hear that note. I can determine if it's good or not, if it works with the one previous to it. If I'm making a painting, I'm putting oil or whatever it is instantly on the canvas, and I see the result of that. But in so much of software design, we do these weird things where we work in abstraction layers. Maybe we write a little bit of code, and it has to compile, and then you see the output. Or you kind of make some changes over in this thing, and then you see the result a little bit later. So this whole idea of being able to immediately have a connection to what you create is really important. It allows you to work more quickly, and it also allows you to kind of try out things rapidly and see if they work or if they don't work. So I have a few ideas about properties of better design tools. These are definitely not meant to be rules. These are just kind of my ideas for ways in which we should think that will allow us to build better tools for software design and for interaction design. So the first is that design tools should have the same properties as the medium for which we're designing. Things again like touches and orientation and state and device movement. Photoshop does not allow you to have these things. Design tools ideally would, so that we can have a better idea when we're designing the tool of what it will feel like when we actually use it in the environment that it will ultimately live. A better design tool would allow for direct manipulation and instantaneous feedback. Again, getting back to kind of the music idea or guitar idea, you instantly know when you're playing guitar if something sounds good or if it doesn't. In design, our tools should have that same ability. Ideally, we're not working through layers of abstraction, but we're working directly with the design itself. Design tools should use real representative data. It's so easy to fake in Photoshop what the perfect state looks like. We are all guilty of this. I'm guilty of this. You design a mock, it looks perfect. You chose your best Instagram photos to put in there, and you show it to developers, and it looks cool, and then they build it, and you just get a totally different experience than what you designed in Photoshop. It's because you're designing for a perfect idealized state. You're not using real data. So if our tools allowed us to use real data, I think we'd do a better job of being able to express, what this thing might look like once it's out in the real world, and also help us to design better for what the data actually is. A design tool should be able to adapt to changing constraints and context. So this is as simple as should we have a grid that's 3 photos across or 4 photos? If I'm in Photoshop and we decide to do 4 photos, I have to remake my whole grid. It's very painful, and it's not quickly and easily adaptable. This goes all the way up to what happens when Apple ships a new device, or what happens when Google Glass becomes super popular. Do you think we're going to be designing interfaces in Photoshop for Google Glass or for self-driving cars? There are all these new mediums that are going to come, and we should be ready for them. And our tools should enable us to design for those mediums, not just designing static pictures. So finally, and this one is perhaps a little optional or idealized, but design tools should be optimized for implementation. And what this means is that when you're designing something, it would be really great, the holy grail would be that you can actually ship what you designed. You don't have to work with a developer to kind of recreate an animation or an interaction. This one's much harder to do, but we should be trying to build towards that, to where we as designers can build something, and there isn't that translation process of working with a developer and engineer. Rather, we can just give them what we designed, and they can implement it. So those are some of my ideas about what makes a better tool, and I'd love to show a really quick example of a small aspect of what I mean by that. And this is by no means perfect. There's lots of problems with it. But it's an idea that I want to get out there and try to help start the conversation and inspire people for how we can build better tools and what some of that might look like. So it's a small cool tool called Tweak that I'm working on. It's unfortunate that you can't see it in detail, but it's essentially an iOS designed prototyping tool that's built natively on top of UIKit. So there's a few advantages of this. But real quick, I can kind of walk you guys through what exactly it is. So on the right here, you can see a viewer. This is an example, a demo that I'm going to show of Facebook chat heads. It's a pretty simple example. And then on the left, there's kind of this notion of layers, much like a layer palette in Photoshop or Sketch. And then layers can have properties as well, which you can see those sliders up there. Or I guess you can't see the sliders, but those things control the position of each layer, its opacity, its scale, things like that. And then down here, there's this interesting thing going on where layers can have interactions. So you can basically add a tap interaction to a layer, or in the future, a drag or a pinch and zoom or a swipe. And then when the user does that, you can add transitions. So you can basically make layers do things. So now I'm quickly going to show a video of kind of recreating the chat heads idea in Facebook. And it's this idea that there's this little avatar, of a person, and when you tap it, your conversation appears, and when you tap it again, it closes. And I want to show you how quickly this can be built in this tool. So here it kind of starts. There's just these 3 layers on the screen. They're obviously not positioned perfectly. So you could use the sliders to kind of control, the opacity. So this is me, I'm changing the opacity now. But it'd be better if you can directly manipulate. So, I should be able to drag this layer where I want on the screen. I shouldn't have to control sliders to determine that. And then you can add an interaction. So this is now showing a transition state. So where this layer is going to end up when I tap it. And again, I can just drag that to where I want it. And then when I tap, it kind of goes to that place that I wanted it to go in that transition. So that was basically all it took to get that layer to tap it, to move, and it uses real-time spring physics. The properties that showed up in that transition panel are all native to iOS. You can use those exact values in what you code. That basically took 30 seconds. It's pretty easy to do that in Quartz Composer or Framer, but it would definitely take longer, and you're not working directly with with your content. There's no direct manipulation there. So next we'll kind of add the transitions for the other layers. So the next one is going to be this chat layer. It needs to, sorry, let me go back one. Videos are always tricky. So I think now I'm adding the interactions. Yeah, so the chat layer, when it appears, it's going to be in this state. So I want to set it up for that. But then by default, it's going to be kind of hidden, right? So I want to move it to where it should start from. And I'm going to edit the scale and kind of tweak it down and position it. So that's where it's going to originate from when I tap on that chat head. So now you can see, basically the whole interaction is done. But I want the background to fade out a little bit so you can focus on the message. So I can just edit that transition. And there you have basically a fully functioning prototype of what chat heads might look like. And that's all done in real time. You're able to use direct manipulation. This is an iPad app, so I can drag it around with my finger. And then the other cool aspect of this is you can kind of tweak in real time some animation curves. So let's say I want to make the chat head more springy, or I just want to play around. Again, getting back to tools should let us really quickly express ideas. I just want to play around with this. So I can change those values and see how it reacts. I would never obviously ship this because I think it's too springy. But if I wanted to see what it might look like with, if it took longer, I just edit it and then I can see the result in real time. So again, this is just a quick example of I think where tools can be headed in interaction design, such that we can more quickly and in a more real way express our ideas to people. So you can follow along at tweakapp.co. Tweak for me it's going to be kind of a playground for me to express these ideas and try to just get the conversation started about what better tools might look like. I might eventually try to ship something, but I think it's more about starting that conversation in the broader design community about how we can all work together to build these better tools. So the last thing that I would leave you guys with is that tools shape our ability to bring form to ideas. And because of that, we need to push the limits of what our tools can do, so they can help us better design in the environments in which our designs and our products will ultimately live. So that's all I have. Would be happy to take questions about stuff.
Anybody have any questions? Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Josh. Question.
So does Dropbox give you time to do this at work, or is this all a side project?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of the Framer tools I do work on at work because we use that. It's so core to kind of our design and prototyping process. Tweak for me has kind of been a side project. I started it over Christmas last year, just trying to learn more about Objective-C and also, again, trying to push the ability of our design tools. So mainly right now it's a side project, but they're also very flexible with bringing it back into the fold. Like I said, prototyping is very core to our process at Dropbox. So we are given kind of the time and ability to use these tools because it makes our day job, so to speak, that much better in the future. Yeah.
The assets in there, are they images? Or?
Yeah, so those are right now the way that you kind of get them in there. Those are just images that you'd pull from a Dropbox folder. So similar to how most other tools currently work, you just cut those images, put them in a folder, and then it just automatically imports them as layers for you.
Is this tool available as a beta or on GitHub or something that I can download and test it at?
So there's an email you can sign up for. It's in a little bit of a fragile state right now. I ultimately need to decide what to do with it. I'll probably put it up on GitHub. I've made some other tools that are similar that are on my GitHub. If you look for that, it's just Josh Puckett at GitHub. But I definitely want to get this stuff out there so that people can kind of play with it and again see where we can go in pushing these tools forward. Any other questions? Yeah.
Right
here. So I guess with this tool and with Swift with Apple, what Apple announced, a lot of these are focused around sort of native apps. What are your thoughts on this sort of prototyping for web animations and that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So the nice thing about the web is you don't have a lot of these problems about like a translation process. So if you're working on the web, you could just use JavaScript to kind of prototype those interactions. And then once you're happy with it, that's the code that you ship. So that's, I think, a big advantage to using something like Framer for website prototyping, is that any sort of animation or interaction you do, you can ultimately ship that because that's real code. I think in terms of tools, you can get better. The barrier to coding is not that high. But at the same time, learning JavaScript can kind of seem daunting. So I think we need to do a better job of lowering that bar. But I think the same principle applies. You can build tools that allow you to quickly output what you create in the tool.
You kind of just touched on how Framer is real code. Is that the goal for tweak to like export Objective-C?
Totally, totally. So it's, like I said, it's built natively on top of UIKit. So when that kind of transition panel comes up and you saw me editing those values, those are like the actual numbers that you would put into an Objective-C animation block. So because it's built on top of UIKit, that's, you as a designer can get it basically perfect and then just send those values to your dev. The tool should probably have some like export or email functionality, but that's the exact same values you would put in a real code block. So that's kind of why I started building on the iPad, is I wanted it to be in the environment that it would ultimately live in, so that you wouldn't have to do this thing of, all right, I have my Spring in Quartz Composer, and now let me try to like recreate it with my developer and spend a day tweaking that. Cool. All the way in the back if we have time, I guess. Yeah, so the two tools there are Origami, which is kind of, you go to Facebook, or origami.facebook.com, I think that's the URL. But basically they built a lot of tools on top of Quartz Composer, which is originally an Apple tool, but they've built a lot of, kind of fixed a lot of bugs and added some nice tools on top of that. So that's one of them. And then framer.js is another one. So I think that's framerjs.com. Sorry? What's the link to my GitHub? Or what's on it? Oh, those tools that I made, sure. So some sketch plugins, just making it easy, easier to work with like guides, for example, or to like save a whole artboard to a PNG. So that's on my GitHub. And then what was the other tool? Oh, Frame Review. That's going to be in the App Store soon. But.
Cool.
Cool.
Thanks, Josh.
All right, thanks, guys.